Welcome to Bold Agendas, the podcast where we explore topics of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. Over the past 2 years, conversations about AI have often centered on the technology itself, the models, the tools, the hype cycle. But increasingly, the real challenge isn't whether AI works, it's whether organizations can move quickly enough to operationalize it. Because AI isn't just introducing new tools, it's changing how decisions get made, how work gets orchestrated, how organizations learn, how leadership operates, and ultimately what competitive advantage even means. And that may be the deeper shift, not AI as software, but AI as a new operating environment for the enterprise. Today's guest is Charlene Li, a longtime analyst, author, advisor, and one of the early voices helping leaders understand how technology fundamentally reshapes organizations, leadership, and customer relationships. Charlene is the founder of the Altimeter Group and a former analyst with Forrester Research, where she focused on the disruptive impact of emerging technologies on business and society. She is also a multiple-time New York Times bestselling author whose previous books include Groundswell, Open Leadership, and the Disruption Mindset. Her latest book, Winning with AI, the 90-Day Blueprint for Success, co-authored with Dr. Katya Walsh, explores how leaders can move beyond AI experimentation to creating measurable organizational value, quickly, responsibly, and at scale. But underneath the practical roadmap is a much bigger leadership argument. That is, in the AI era, competitive advantage may be increasingly belonging to organizations that learn, decide, and operationalize faster than everyone else. I'm Mimi Brooks, and this is Bold Agendas, Winning the AI Race, Why Execution Speed Matters More than Perfect Strategy. Let's get started. Charlene, welcome back to Bold Agendas. It's sincerely a delight and honor to have you here. Thanks for taking some time to meet with us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Charlene, I was saying when we heard that you were going to be able to come back on the show, that one of the things that I love about talking to you is your history with digital transformation from the 20 teens to today. And the interesting thing is because you wrote so many books regularly over that period, it almost creates like a library of digital transformation, right? With a perspective on the issues of their time as these successive waves now leading us to AI, have continued to, create all kinds of momentum and disruption. So I just wanted to tell you that. I think it's really an interesting and delightful thing about your work.
Well, thank you. I've seen a lot, and we like to say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely does rhyme.
That's right. Exactly. So maybe I'll start there before I get into, the some of the interesting concepts of the new book, which I was telling folks about before you came on. Just kind of your perspective on why this wave, this AI wave of digital transformation, is particularly challenging or perhaps even unique to leaders, Charlene, in ways that they didn't experience prior.
Right. I think the difference here is that it is the speed and the scale at which this is happening. So the internet, when it came around, and I was right in the middle of trying to get newspapers online in the mid-90s. With the internet, we had the benefit of things moving really slowly. People didn't know how to get access to it. It was so difficult. We were on dial-up. And so we had that luxury of taking the time to figure it out. Now, anybody with a browser, anybody who knows how to use language, which is everyone, all you have to do is just ask a question, can get access to this amazing technology. And so our ability as organizations to change and to adapt to the use of these new technologies is definitely lagging behind the technology itself. So there's a lot of pressure being built right now. leaders to do something, do anything. Just like tell us what we're going to do with this AI, how it's going to impact us.
Yeah, I think that this idea, when I read through the book, which was, really, really interesting. So I have a lot of questions on that as we go forward. But the concept of velocity is really kind of the horizontal message that runs through this. Do you think that's right, Charlene, that this idea of, because it creates positions of yours like, um, imperfect strategy shouldn't hold us up from moving forward. Same thing with imperfect data or other concepts that could impede momentum, right? Like the momentum is really the important idea, at least in terms of get on the train and identify how to make, early valuable movements as opposed to waiting for all the pieces, of the puzzle to be face up on the table.
Right. And this is going against the grain of how most organizations and how most leaders function, which is there's going to be a change. Let's figure out all the permutations of that change. Let's remove every single possible risk and mitigate for every single possibility that this is not going to work out 100% to plan, on time, on budget. And so as a result, your efforts to make this perfect plan, to have all the answers worked out in advance, means that you're going to move extremely slowly and extremely small.
Right.
And AI really begs the opportunity for you to think big, first of all, not to think small. You may start small, but you have to be able to scale fast. So think big, start small, scale fast. And that's why we wrote the book. And the subtitle is 90-Day Plan, a 90-day blueprint to get you on the road and creating value. There's no reason to have to wait. And you trying to do all these things to work out the perfect way to do things is just going to hold you back, because if you get started, you'll figure out all the things that are wrong with it really quickly, and then you can make adjustments to it.
The subtitle of the book is certainly provocative, and it brings into, kind of light the idea of, what can really be accomplished in 90 days. I realize that, we all think this is a strategy that is fluid and it iterates, and success and lessons learned grow on top of each other, as we scale and iterate over time. But there is a plan for 90 days here in terms of this blueprint that you're recommending. So what do you think is accomplishable then from a leader's perspective? Can you just outline, the basic approach to this 90-day blueprint that you're talking about in the book?
Right. And we wrote this because leaders were asking us, where do we start? How do we start creating value for our organizations? What's the first thing we do, second thing, third thing we do? Because there's just tons of noise out there. And what we do in the first part is, how do you get started? How do you pull the team together? And in particular, put together one leader who's going to be driving value. They wake up every single morning thinking about, today, this is how we're going to drive value with AI in our organization. They have that responsibility and accountability. And you also have responsible and ethical AI policies in place. The second part of the book is really pulling together that roadmap that aligns with your business strategy. And this is what I call the meat of the book, because without that roadmap, without something written down that everyone can look at and push and pull against, you're not going to go anywhere. And then the third section is really all the building blocks that you need in place to be able to execute: the culture, the people, the technology, and especially the governance. And then the very last chapter, we talk about how leadership is the accelerant for all of this to happen. And so it lays out all the basic things you need to have in your roadmap, all the essential pieces. And the goal in 90 days is to lay them down on a piece of paper and just sketch it out. And know that you're going to have opportunities to refine it, but you have to get started, because you don't know what you don't know. And the only way to figure that out is to get started.
Seems like the roadmap piece, Charlene, is particularly important, because I imagine that that's where we're really grounding this from a business strategy, operating model perspective, the context of that versus technology for technology's sake, technology trying to seek, its own solution, if you will, as opposed to the business strategy and the operating model, driving the answer to the question, what AI makes sense for us as opposed to what AI might make sense to anyone else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the problem is we treat AI like a technology problem because it looks like a technology, it smells like a technology, it acts like a technology. But if you only treat it like a technology problem, that's where it will stay. And so you'll deploy ChatGPT to everybody, and then you go, so what? What do we use it for? And that's where I believe AI is actually a leadership problem. And what we focus in the book is how do you need to show up as a leader? And in particular, be driving constantly the fact that we need to use AI to support our strategic objectives. Whatever those objectives are, whatever the opportunities are to break down those challenges, to achieve your strategy objectives better, faster, cheaper. And I like how this one executive explained it to me. He goes, we have 7 strategic objectives. The first 6 are your usual suspects: grow revenue, improve customer satisfaction. And the 7th one is use AI to accomplish the first 6. And I think that's a great perspective to put it in. AI does not need its own separate strategy from your business strategy. You have a business strategy. Focus on that because that's something that every leader knows and understands extremely well. Then anybody who comes to you with an AI idea, a project, a vendor, say, great, don't tell me what it does. Tell me how it supports our strategy, one of these objectives that we have. And until you can explain that, I don't have a discussion with you. Don't explain to me what the technology does. All I want to know is first and foremost, how does it create value for us?
So, Charlene, what do you think about the first step that you were describing in terms of, centralizing AI leadership so that there's a focus every day on AI and progress that we want to make? Who is that person? What is that position, from your perspective? And what skill sets do you think are particularly important there?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's somebody who understands how to be a change agent and what that requires. They've gone through the ringer in driving change. They understand how difficult and messy it is. And so they understand also how flexible the plan needs to be, but also have a direction to drive that change. They need to be technically proficient. They don't need to be a technical person, but they need to be able to have a fluidity and a fluency in what AI can do and also what it can't do. And then it also needs to be somebody who understands the business strategically, somebody who can articulate those strategic objectives, understands them, and then finally has the authority across the entire enterprise to make change happen. Because inevitably, you're going to be breaking down silos. You're going to be putting together new governance oversight. And so having that authority to make those changes is really important. Now, if you look at those 4 things, it typically is not your CIO. And that is who is usually entrusted with AI, like, oh, it's a technology. Let's give it to the CIO. And the CIO goes, well, I can procure it. I can give it to everybody. But then what happens? That's why you need a leader who can drive that change, that enterprise level change, because that's how you create enterprise level value.
I think that this concept of value creation, Charlene, new value creation, and people that can find those opportunities there seem to be, a grounding idea in terms of, driving these key initiatives. Sounds like you describe a similar idea.
Right. And I think one of the biggest problems right now is when we think about AI, we're looking primarily at how do we drive efficiency and productivity in our existing business? And that's a very valid question. But I don't think you win in this marketplace, in this environment, by just being more efficient, by being more productive. When other people are saying, this is a transformational opportunity, what could we do with this that we couldn't do before? And so they're saying, what could we do if our workforce was fluent with AI? What are the new capabilities we could have? One of my favorite case studies from the book is a call center called Connecta. And they're the usual things. They improved quality. They dropped errors in their call center responses by 85 to 90%. So just quality just went up. I mean, just like a no-brainer thing to do with AI. They used it to enhance the calls and the effectiveness of their human agents in the way that they engaged with people. So again, another great way to support the existing business. And then they looked around and said, well, we have this new capability. What else can we do with it? And they saw that law firms had these non-performing loans that were not being looked at. And they thought to themselves, well, law firms are not going to have this capability with the AI and the security and everything that's needed. We already have that. We can do this for them and take something that used to take weeks and months and do it in hours. So they started a whole new business line, incorporating new ways to serve this unmet need in the marketplace, and are again growing the business. So over the next 2 years, they're going to grow their workforce by 5%, not cut it. So these are the opportunities, I think, that if you're truly being creative and looking at enterprise value, you're going to be looking for those opportunities, not just looking for efficiency and productivity.
Sometimes I think that this issue that you're pointing to, Charlene, happens a lot, comes up a lot, and that is the confusion of getting funding for optimizing the business, excuse me, in its current operating model or current value proposition. Because sometimes there's just a pent-up demand for some of these optimization projects that didn't get out of the gate, and they can be advocated by people, or they were on short lists looking for funding, et cetera. So the concept of optimizing the business versus transforming the business and being able to distinguish, what is our portfolio of transformation work really that we're really talking about here? I see those mixed together, into a single portfolio all the time. So that's kind of interesting as well. And certainly if there is a center of gravity around that, you think it would be in distinguishing, whether or not we're really talking about, you wouldn't say keeping the lights on projects, but you would say iterating in our current value proposition versus creating new value.
Right. We have a little framework in the book called the double S matrix prioritization. And it takes all these different opportunities that you have and separates them to a simple 2x2 graph. One is the size of the value, and the other axis is the speed to the value. So you have in one corner quick wins. These are sort of your optimization things, which is no-brainers. We know we can do them. We know what the value is going to be, but they may be small bits of value. You have your strategic bets, like that non-performing loans. We don't know exactly where they're going to come from, but we think there's going to be something there, and it's going to take longer because of the data investments, the types of things we have to do. So that may take over a year, but we know the payoff's going to be there. But again, there's something in the middle too. And I'll take one example. A lot of organizations are doing call summarizations now. You summarize the meetings and you have them in archive, and we do some really good things. We send it to everybody. Everybody sees the to-dos. Everybody's agreed on what the single point of truth is coming out of that meeting. But I think a momentum maker is when you aggregate all of that intelligence in the organization. Say you're a sales manager and you go, I wonder what we're saying in all of our sales calls. And in the past, it used to filter up like these are the changing needs that our customers are having. But now you can easily scrape all of those sales calls, see and understand what are some customer needs that are happening, send that to product development. Maybe you were seeing that certain salespeople are coming up with a new point of view that should be populated across all the salespeople. Maybe you're identifying that these salespeople are having some issues. So being able to take something that looks like a 1-point quick win and turn it into a strategic asset is where these momentum makers come in. And again, you won't necessarily see those at the very beginning of the process, but you may start to identify them. But you have to be open and looking for those things to invest in them appropriately in your portfolio.
So, Charlene, how are established businesses both challenged in this context of speed and adaptability and velocity, versus the assets that they might be sitting on in terms of the business that would create real opportunity for disruptive change and new value creation if they could just find them. So how do you think about that with, large legacy organizations that are struggling with, what we might consider organizational weight or debt or whatever we want to refer to it as, including processes, culture, et cetera, and the assets that they might be sitting on that could represent a bit of a gold mine under the right set of circumstances.
Right. And this is combined with my previous book called The Disruption Mindset, and looking at, do incumbents have a big disadvantage, or do they actually have an advantage? If you think about it, incumbents have all these assets, skilled expertise, and people, brand, reputation, customers. Those are all incredible assets to have. Any startup would just be dying to have those things. But those customers are also a liability because they're presumably quite profitable to you. So you don't want to put them at risk. And so much of an organization's efforts are about maintaining and preserving the status quo. And when something disruptive like AI comes along, like, whoa, this might really damage us. So we're going to take this slow. We're going to be responsible about this because we have to protect our existing customers. And I think that is the biggest mistake, is that your customers trust you so much. My co-author, Cottrell Welch, worked at Levi's, and it's over 168 years old of data and reputation. No incumbent, no startup is going to be able to penetrate that moat. And so one of the things that they think about is at Levi's is, how do we take those things that are assets to us and not let them be a liability? So I think this is one of the biggest challenges. And startups have one major advantage for them. Despite all the things, they don't have any customers to protect. So they can go after your most weakest customers. They can pick you off from the side. I mean, this is the biggest advantage that startups have. And similar to that, so many incumbents are saying, I feel so behind right now. How am I ever going to catch up? It doesn't take you long. I mean, these technologies are fairly easy to implement. The hardest thing would be your organizational change. And if you recognize that from the very beginning, that that's the challenge, that technology isn't the challenge, your organization is, then you can take steps to figure out what are the best ways to start tackling that cultural and organizational burdens and opportunities that we have to overcome.
So, Charlene, I'm sure that because you're a practitioner as well as a thought leader here, which I imagine is a cycle that feeds both capabilities in a good way. What did you find when you took the blueprint concepts to businesses and tried it with them? What worked? And if some companies responded particularly well, what was it about the company's ability to think in new ways, that you thought might have differentiated them from others? So, what were the lessons learned in the process of doing your research in terms of the recommendation?
Yeah, two things. First of all, strategic clarity is so important. When an organization lives and breathes their strategy, their purpose, their mission, their values. I mean, we talk about this, but do we actually practice it? The organizations that practice this are so much better off because it's just instinctual. Of course, we would go back to our values to establish what responsible and ethical AI looks like. Of course, we have our strategy documents right here, and everybody understands what we're trying to do, what we're fighting for, our purpose is aligned. So these things all come together beautifully in organizations that are run that way. And similarly, organizations that have a really strong culture, we identify some key characteristics of AI-ready cultures. And there are things like operating at speed, not perfection, being able to focus on those strategic opportunities, a culture of experimentation and learning, and then also being very customer centric. So these are the things that again, if those things are in place, you're just more ready to take on the challenges that AI can bring and also capitalize on those opportunities. Organizations that struggle with transformation and change are going to immensely struggle with AI. Because again, it's not just simply putting a technology in place. It's really about this change, not only in the work, but also in how people see themselves in this organization.
Yeah, it really magnifies in some ways, right? Organizational fragmentation or dysfunction or whatever, in a pretty significant way. What about Charlene, experimentation? Like, when did you find that experimentation as a capability was a benefit? And then when did it do something weird, linger too long, couldn't get out of experimentation into launching things at scale? So what did that look like?
Well, something that organizations are dealing with left and right is what we call pilot purgatory. And pilots are the places where value, frankly, goes to die. Because a pilot is a place where you go, well, we're not sure about this. We think it has potential, but we need to do some experiments, figure out what works before we commit fully to it. So when a pilot leader goes to IT and says, we need this data, IT goes, well, that's going to be really hard. When that's a real project, come back and we'll do it for you. In the meantime, here's some batch data.
Right.
Go to marketing and sales and customer service saying, we really need to think about this customer journey in a holistic way instead of this fragmented way that breaks down in between silos. They'll say like, this is just a pilot right now. When you're serious about this, come back and we'll take a look at this. And so pilots by definition are meant to be short-term, a single use, not to scale. And by that definition will fail because AI needs these elements to truly work. So our advice to organizations, stop doing pilots. Only do projects because that project is important to you strategically. And because it's important strategically to you, you're going to put a lot of eggs into that basket. Again, it won't be the only basket. You'll have this portfolio of projects. But we're serious about this. And it has the authority and weight of the team and the board to make it happen. Experimentation still has to happen though, because experimenting says, I'm learning. And the purpose of experimenting is to learn, not to launch something that's going to create value. So experimenting has to happen. You want to encourage that. You want that to flourish, but then also need to know, okay, it's time to stop experimenting and it's time to launch. And that idea and sense of launching something that creates value is what's missing oftentimes.
I think the paradigm that to me sounds related to, in terms of paradigms that might not fit going forward, could be a paradigm of failing fast. Because again, that's not really bringing in this continuous learning idea from the organization's perspective, potentially too, right? I mean, that's a bit of a similar concept to what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, fail fast, fail smart sounds really good, but frankly, it's a couple decades old already.
Yeah.
And I think the better way to think about it is learn fast and implement fast. So this is not about failing. And frankly, nobody likes to fail. I think it's an outdated model. I mean, and I fully bought into this too, is about the failure imperative. It's important to be able to learn how to do this. But in the end, it's really about learning and being open to that and realizing that things are not going to be perfect. So for example, we recommend putting together, it sounds insane when I say it, an 18-month roadmap for how you're going to use AI to create value. 18 months. And people think, I don't even know what AI is going to do in the next week or month. Are you crazy about how do you pull something together for 18 months? And my point here is this is not a technology roadmap. This is a value creation roadmap. If we want to look out and say, these are our strategic objectives, how we're going to create value, then say in 18 months, what would that look like potentially? And how could we be using AI in 18 months to do these things? Because unless you have that longer term viewpoint about what that roadmap is going to look like, there's no way you can start to attain it because you have to start today, this quarter, to think about what that future is going to look like and take actions today. And here's the key. At the end of every quarter, you're changing that roadmap. You're updating that roadmap. It's an adaptive roadmap of how you're going to create value. And you're going to also add another quarter at the end. So it's a rolling 18-month map.
It's fluid.
So we like
fine. It's fluid by design. Yeah.
Exactly. So when the competition is changing, technology is changing, as your organization is changing, you should be adapting that roadmap. We like to say that the strategy is written in ink and the roadmap is written in pencil. Mm-hmm. So know where you're going, but know that the path you use to get to that place may look very different quarter by quarter.
So, Charlene, let's focus this on leadership. Because I think that in addition to velocity and speed, this concept of AI being a leadership challenge, perhaps more fundamentally, than certainly a technology challenge and part of the whole organization systems and structure, capabilities from a the ability to be able to run a roadmap as you're describing. So, how did you find, again, in talking to business, how leadership is really challenged to manage here and now? What did you find to be the common, maybe most stubborn challenges for leaders? And if there were patterns, in terms of businesses that were able to grasp and move more quickly as a result of leadership approach, leadership style, supporting culture, whatever. What were those things?
Well, I was just at a conference yesterday with 150 CEOs. And the conversation I had with most of them was, it usually began, well, I'm not a technologist. I'm not a technology person. I don't do technology. And I went, this is not a technology problem. This is a leadership problem. And you don't have somebody making these strategic decisions at the top and guiding it and saying, this is the direction we want this technology to do. And they're just abdicating that responsibility to whoever it is, typically the CIO. And my point here is that AI exposes, as to your point, the places where leadership is not showing up. It puts a big shining light on organizational dysfunctions, on places where data is inaccessible, how silos are getting in the way. AI hates silos. Like, what do you mean I can't get access to that data or that process or that customer? And it just exposes that in clear daylight, because this is an opportunity for you to rethink everything that you do. And I think automation is one of the most interesting things that AI can do right now, especially with agentic AI. And if you're just automating your existing workflows, then you're doing it wrong. This is an opportunity to say, how do we do it differently? Because now we have amazing humans, we have amazing AI, we have the potential to use them together. And so what you're optimizing for isn't just automation of a process, you're optimizing for the best outcomes. And you need leaders and managers who understand that this is what you're trying to do. And that is not a technology problem. If there's one role that's missing from most of the conversations around AI, it's your HR person, because this is a people problem. It's a transformation problem. It's a communication problem.
It's funny that you went there. I thought you were going to say, instead of going to HR, I thought you were going to tie it to the board somehow in terms of board and leadership, alignment, which I want to get to. So that's pretty interesting. But, Charlene, I just want to say, because I think that's fantastic to get that, kind of concentrated response that you were talking about. It's not like we haven't been talking about first mover advantage for quite a while now relative to AI. It's not a new concept, right, Charlene? It's pretty established in terms of leadership advice. So from your perspective, how do you think leaders digest what they're hearing in terms of, first response advantage and the winners there, and the risk of not being at the front of the pack in terms of, their AI strategy and efforts, and some of the things that you're seeing as a result today?
Right. And I want to distinguish what first mover means. First mover isn't picking up the latest technology. Mm-hmm. Because frankly, a lot of the latest technology is simply not enterprise ready. The first mover advantage is we're actually changing the way our business works. We're adapting our business. We're picking the places where we strategically want to use AI, and we're doing that before anybody else that we can see is doing that. So you may not be at the very forefront of using all the technologies, but I guarantee you, especially right now, if you're doing anything with AI at a strategic enterprise level, you're most likely the first person that within your networks that visibly is doing this. And it will feel really nerve-wracking because it's a little safer when somebody else has gone before you. But there is probably nobody that you know of who has really done this at that enterprise level. So again, that's where that courage needs to be there. And that reassurance again, that we're doing this not out of any sort of chasing of the technology. We're doing this because we're so sure that this is going to help us move better and faster towards our strategic objectives. You're grounded in those objectives. And that gives you the confidence to say, we can then experiment. We can then figure out whether to persist on a particular path with AI, or do we need to pivot because there's something else that's different? And even those two questions of when to persist and when to pivot are, again, just fundamentally leadership questions. There's just no right answer to that.
Yeah, because, right, Charlene, the continuity is strategic commitment, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the continuity across, projects, across organizations, across silos is the continuity of strategic commitment. We don't take our foot on and off the gas in terms of AI based on the project, the organization, the leader itself. I think that's what you're describing when you're saying, first mover advantage is strategic commitment that causes you to put your foot on the gas and to stay with it. Stay with it, lessons learned, adaptation expected, etc. What we don't do is have the project pilot run forever, isolate it to one part of the organization and not look for at scale, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yeah.
So well put.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Charlene, what about boards? How do you feel, in your experience, you've seen boards accelerate and build confidence in the leadership team in making bold moves like this, because that's what they are, and people worry about the downside. I think perhaps more than they worry about the lack of the upside, which is not terribly surprising. But, how do the boards assist, the company and the leadership team in building stick-to-itness here and the confidence that, that moving in this direction is something that the board's going to be behind?
Right. Again, one board member said very wisely that if you're expecting your CEO and executive team to keep you up to date on what AI is doing, that's the wrong assumption to make. You have to do your own research, do your best understanding, and pick and choose the areas where you want to go deeper into how AI is developing. And again, the thing here is that boards don't need to be AI experts. That's the last thing they need to do. They need instead to be asking the right questions across 3 specific areas. And these are the traditional areas that boards have always been asked questions. What's your strategy and structure? What is the risk and accountability we're building in place? Again, are we making sure that those are in place? And then do we have the organizational capability to execute on that strategy? And they apply again to AI. There are some very specific questions you can be asking based on those 3 categories. But what I like about how one board member said it is, AI is moving fast. It's also moving weird. So your job isn't to chase after the latest thing. It's to stay grounded and to stay oriented. Again, that through line of what the strategy is, and be consistently saying, how is AI supporting our strategy? How is it creating value? And never veer off of that. I know that one board member said, my personal interest here is in making sure we're doing things ethically. And this has been a long-standing issue for them. So they said, okay, what do AI ethics look like? So they engaged and hired an AI ethicist to give them a deep dive tutorial into how this applies to the organization. And then they brought that perspective into the board meeting. And so board members will pick and choose, but it's based on their expertise, their experience, what captures their passions too as well. And that's what you want to encourage with your board, that sense of curiosity to be able to ask better questions when it comes to the use of AI in your organization.
I think it's interesting too, Charlene. There's also, kind of a board version of AI is not the technology strategy that needs to, be bought into from the board perspective as well. Because, we've seen many organizations where adopting AI technology was from pressure from the board, almost like, we don't care what you're doing it with, you need to start doing something. And that's not always good advice either, right? Relative to, again, another way of chasing the technology as opposed to chasing the business strategy or the business value.
Yeah. And what they really want is they want to know what you're going to do with it. And in the absence of the executive team coming back and saying, here's our strategic plan. Well, like, at least do something. Like, we're going to drag you into this era. And sometimes that's the role of the board at that point, because the executive team is so reluctant to do anything. And that's a whole issue where if an executive and a leader does not feel comfortable with something, they just avoid it. They're just hoping that it kind of disappears, or maybe I can outlast it without having to do anything substantive. Again, it's a technology, and I'm not a technologist. Again, it is not a technology problem. It's a leadership problem.
Right.
And when the board can impart that perspective onto leaders and say, you need to get fluent. You need to understand this. This is the future. So it's not simply deploying the technology. It's really learning how to use it for your job, for your organization.
Yeah, so I think it's a critical enabler, and listen, these are choppy waters, so it's really helpful to have the board, be a sounding board on some of these difficult issues in terms of investment and risk, and so having them on board actually becomes, I think, an enabler, and a risk manager, enabler to the executive team. It gives us a place to go when we're trying to decide paths forward, et cetera. So I think quite useful when it's a productive relationship in terms of the AI context. So, Charlene, can I go to some of these human sides of the issue? And I want to start with the relationship, just because I could get to most of them from the ethics issue that you brought up, to most of the human issues from there. And so I'll just poke at a few and get your opinion on them. So the relationship of AI ethics and strategic workforce planning, how do we see those two ideas coming together? Because in many organizations that we come across, I would say part of their plan does not include a clear strategic workforce development plan or workforce strategy plan that is in alignment with their roadmap. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. This is why we think a roadmap is so important. Because again, one of the most important things of that is the people and the skill sets that you need. And it's being very clear-eyed to say, if this is the future work that's going to be done, and we anticipate that AI is going to do that, well, who's going to use the AI? How does that impact our workforce? What are the skills our people need? Which skills are not going to be important anymore? Which tasks are we going to automate? But more importantly, which decisions are we going to automate? And will those decisions be made by AI, by humans, a combination of the two? And I feel that oftentimes when you're doing this, we're undervaluing the importance of the human side of things. AI doesn't happen unless there's a human involved at some point and continuously, even though something may be completely done by an agent, and ultimately there needs to be a human accountable for that you point to and go, it's working or is it not? The outcomes are good quality or not. And that person is responsible for what happens. And so I like to say your HR system doesn't have any space in it for an agentic worker. It's only people who live in your HR systems. Yeah. And so what will those people be looking like? What will their skills be? And you want to have an answer that when somebody comes to you and says, hey, what's going to happen to my job? Am I going to have a job? Is AI going to take my job? And they want you to be honest with them. There's the only two things that people ask is that you be honest with me, you be fair with me. And if my job isn't going to be here, then you give me and be fair and give me a chance to look for another job, or a chance to look for another job inside the company, reskill me, whatever it is. But what are you going to do about this? And so the thing I think that most organizations should be able to do if they have the roadmap is say, well, when it comes to your job, this is what our roadmap looks like. It will impact your job. These tasks will probably change. We don't know exactly. And I can't guarantee whether you have a job. I can't guarantee that I will have a job. But I can guarantee you are going to be AI fluent. And we're going to prepare you the best way possible to deal with this future. We're going to give you the tools. We'll give you the training. And very importantly, we're going to give you the time to be able to practice, become fluent. And if you can actually say that, and that's the truth, then I think you can have a really good conversation with that person. And even then, the reality is some jobs it's very difficult. to talk to one bank that said, we used to have 90 people reading checks. The technology has gotten to the point now where we only need 5 people. That's 85 people that we had to work with to figure out what was going to happen to them. And about half of them wanted to be retrained and reskilled into other jobs. And one half of them said, no, this is not for me. I'd rather take the package and leave. But at least they had the conversation. They felt good about that. This is something that we constantly do as organizations. Some of us do it better than others. And I think it's for every organization to figure out and to plan in advance what are these changes going to be to the extent that we know, and to be very clear about what are the things that we're still figuring out.
Just to hang there for a couple more minutes, Charlene, one of the things that I think is difficult, for businesses is I think that the kind of information that they think they need to understand to bring workers into the dialogue early, they don't feel they know today. And the challenge with that is that you might not know the answers to those specific questions for a long time, before you can say with clarity, 50% of these roles aren't going to be here 3 years from now. 25% of those are going to be someplace else or gone altogether, whatever. And I think this is where your concept of strategy and purpose and clarity on value creation in the future state does provide a basis for workforce dialogue. Because what I can at least, discuss is, what does new value creation mean to the workforce? How would people participate in new value creation, even if I can't say with a lot of detail exactly what it means to your job description in terms of activities and tasks? I can at least describe it. And I think that most people, most workers would be able to take that idea in and decide, to your point, do I want to be reskilled for that? Do I want to make decisions and do that type of work in the future state? Or is it really not for me? So I think this idea of engaging people early with what you do know and sharing the value proposition ideas that you have that could be thought of as a way of, pulling people in to that dialogue so that they could both understand it and potentially extend it is just, worth a lot earlier on than waiting until you feel like we've got something definitive to stay. And now people have just been sitting in a pot brewing this whole time, trying to figure out, if I'm going to be a casualty of this or not. There's nothing worse than feeling that you don't have agency here, right?
Right, right. And I like to say that, when you're rolling out the AI tools, training is something that's done to you. Learning is something that you do. And so that sense of agency that I'm learning, I'm not going through training, I'm learning and I'm figuring out how I can use AI and becoming more fluent in it is a really important sense. And especially to help people carve out that time. I can't tell you how many times I ask people, well, how come your workforce isn't fluent? How come you don't invest in the training and everything? They go, well, we have all that. We have all the tools, but we don't have the time. We have to get our work done today. There's no way we can take our eye off the ball and perform and execute and deliver outcomes. There's simply no time. We're just at full tilt doing that. And I'm like, but what if the AI could actually help you do that? Well, we don't know that. So the organizations that already have this built-in trust with employees, again, this comes down to culture. When there is this trust with employees that they will bring their best, that we will be honest with them, that we're going to have this be a dialogue, that we are comfortable in uncertainty. These are all cultural traits about how we get work done. It's agreements on how we get work done around here.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
organizations that have that are, again, just in a much better position to be able to do
these are the
to
building
use AI.
blocks, right? That you're saying if we have the building blocks in place, we can, put different levels of challenges and problems on top of them. And they really will provide us with a basis, at least for reasoning through it, right? A reliable basis.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why we put such an emphasis on these building blocks and making them as strong as possible in of themselves. These are the functional tools that you use to execute on your AI roadmap. And you can put onto your AI roadmap that we just do not have an AI fluent workforce. So we need to get them fluent. And this is the challenge that I ask people, like, okay, how many of you feel fluent? And again, I was talking to these CEOs yesterday. Maybe 15 out of 150 raise your hands.
Wow. No kidding.
Right. And
Wow.
I define fluency as you just feel comfortable with it. It's something you reach for. I created the analogy I like to use is chopsticks. The first time you are handed a pair of chopsticks, you go, you expect me to pick up food with 2 sticks? That's insane. Like, how do you do this? But then you practice it, it gets a little better, and eventually you're just picking up even slippery noodles. Rice is still maybe a challenge, but you're picking up food without thinking about it. And we need, that is what fluency looks like. I feel comfortable using it. I use it naturally. I know where I can and can't use it because I know its limitations. I know how to use it responsibly and ethically. And in particular, I know how to use it in my job. And so what I encourage leaders to do is the next time you have a meeting, think about for yourself, how can I use AI to prepare for this meeting? And then when you get to the meeting, ask people, how did you use AI to prepare for this meeting? This is how I used it. And it sets the expectations that you will use AI to get your job done. And it also sets the precedent that it's okay to use AI because people still feel, for whatever reason, that it's like cheating. Or
Right.
that it's something that devalues what I do. And the more that you can show, oh no, this is not about, just AI replacing you. And it's not even about AI augmenting you. It's about the human augmenting the AI because AI is only as good as that human using it. And we need to get fluent because you only get great answers if you could put in great questions. You can only ask AI to be strategic or creative if you ask it strategic and creative questions.
Yeah.
So
And
training the human to
when
do
they
this is
respond,
important.
even when you get those responses, right, Charlene, you still have to, you still have to check the judgment, and you have to make sure that the judgment is something that you're comfortable in embracing. Does it work for you with your philosophy on whatever, or your point of view on whatever, or the ethics that you might feel bound to, et cetera. So all of those, human ingenuity and human judgment issues, still need to be managed. And as you said, it's the difference between the human is spinning around the loop of the machine versus the machine is spinning around me, and I'm in control of that. So it's a funny, kind of center of gravity difference, if you will, but pretty significant. Charlene, I just want to touch on this for 1 second. I don't want to get too distracted, but when we talk about the leadership role in ethics and AI from a human perspective, the other thing that seems hugely important to me is there's the internal view of that and there's the external view of that. Right, Charlene, from a leadership perspective, you've got to put both of those balls up in the air and keep them there. And what I mean is that the ethical human issues from an AI perspective, if you're in a leadership role, certainly, brings in stakeholders and interests outside the walls of the enterprise. It could be resource management, for example. It could be other impacts on society or environment or otherwise. And I think that there's a real, leadership challenge and perhaps not, I'm not sure, but maybe not getting as much attention, as the internal ethical issues that to me are profound and naturally come with the territory. Leader plus AI plus changing nature of work, changing nature of human work, impact on other constituents, including environmental constituents, et cetera, in order to make sure, that we're adapting uh, our responsibility, to those stakeholders very proactively. And I think some of this, Charlene, really challenges cultural issues, things like disclosure, things like participation with competitors, things like working across sectors and industries in order to work with adjacent organizations that have common interests, et cetera. So I just want to pause there for a minute because I think that if we're talking about leaders, we're talking about my constituents I've always had and the changing nature of the relationship that I have with them, and then constituent segments that I may not have had before or had in the same way, or perhaps with the same level of potential severity, that have got to come in. And we're doing, a careful consideration of our relationships and behaviors of exchange, if you will. Your thoughts?
Right. Yes, I want to distinguish between responsible AI and ethical AI. They're very related. Responsible just says we're going to use AI in these ways. And we actually built a little framework called the AI trust pyramid. It's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom is safety and security. And then you have fairness, reliability, accountability, and very top transparency, something that you mentioned. It's very important. But will you be transparent about? Internally and externally, and just laying that out there for people. We're not going to disclose, our organization salaries to anybody internally, but we will disclose when we're using AI to make really vital decisions, and we'll disclose how we're using it, and when it's working, when it's not, and just have that level of transparency so everyone understands. And again, it's all to build trust. And when you're talking about the stakeholders, it's really about building trust with them so we can work with them. You talked about the environment. There's tremendous concern around the role of AI, especially in the rise of these data centers. How are we thinking about that? How are we thinking about modulating or using AI in a thoughtful, sustainable way? Again, there's no one right way to do this, but being able to talk about it and have a conversation and have a point of view on this is really important. And then also making sure that everybody in your ecosystem, especially your suppliers, are abiding by your responsible and ethical AI policies, that they have it, that they are understanding and treating, if they're using customer data, for example, with their AI, how are they using it and making sure they're abiding by similar things. Now, ethical AI says, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So this is an ongoing conversation you have. And a company is doing ethical AI well when there is a long list of issues that they're trying to figure out. And for example, when we use synthetic data, where are we getting the data from? Are we collecting that from customers? Do customers, have they agreed to let us use that to create more synthetic data? To what extent do we vouch for and verify that synthetic data is good? There's lots of opportunities for us to be challenging ourselves to say, well, just because we can do that doesn't mean that we should. And then especially when two competing values show up, we have a value of customer privacy, and we have another value of serving customers really well, for example, with personalization. But those two things may potentially be in conflict with each other. So how do we resolve that with AI?
Yeah, I think those are great.
So,
yeah. What's interesting too, Charlene, right, in the same genre of discussion is the idea of policy decisions, versus engagement decisions, right? It used to be easier to say we'll put out our policy when we've got a policy to put out. In many of the cases that we're talking about here, we may only have the best questions for a long period of time before we have good, reliable answers. So the question is, what do you do about the questions that are brewing, even if you can't answer them definitively? What dialogues will you engage in? What dialogues will you engage in with what group of stakeholders so that you're part of the problem-solving process, not just the problem-solving outcomes? It's easy to come out when the answers are known and accepted. It's really hard to come out early, and be open kimono about what at this stage, what you're worried about, what you're looking for, and how you're trying to, build trust by sharing early and often as a matter of commitment to your public constituents and otherwise, even if the answers to those questions will take a while to discover. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do believe this is why governance is so important.
Yeah.
Because your governance is there to help you go through that decision-making process. I mean, governance is there because you don't have the guidelines and the guardrails to just figure out what's black and white. It's to deal with all the gray. And when you can systematically have a list of the things and you can see the trends, you can tackle the most important areas first, second, and third. Having a steering committee to take a look at the big strategic issues, having a working group that deals with the day-to-day execution issues. Those are the two levels. And then again, an office that looks at AI ethics, that tracks things separate from all the activities and strategy that can give feedback, information, both internally and externally, and reports to the CEO and the board, because that's where the ethical issues are in the end up being. Because if it's something that you could resolve at the working group or the strategy committee level, then they will solve it. But these are big ethical issues that have to get escalated to the highest levels.
I do think the comment that you made, about decisioning and managing in the ecosystem, whether it's for operational purposes, Charlene, or external purposes, does create a bit of common ground, because the ecosystem itself kind of defines the landscape that we're talking about here. Different responsibilities therein, but at least the concept of reasoning in the ecosystem is a helpful way to ask, well, what's the sphere of influence that I'm talking about here anyways, So let me kind of come to, my last question. And it goes to this interesting concept that you bring up in the book about leadership, imagination, and hope. Leadership, imagination, and hope. And this concept, I thought it was a great point, about needing to be able to expand, what our organizations believe in, what they believe is possible, right? As an idea of how to think about, leadership and organizations that have the basis, the building blocks, as you were describing, to be successful with the disruption of AI and others. So what can you tell me about how you see imagination and hope playing here? And how important is it to think about, these even imagination as an organizational capability?
Right. We oftentimes talk about the importance of critical thinking when using AI to evaluate whether it's giving you the right answer or not. And I think that's very important. But I think it's also very important to exercise curiosity about what's possible, and even bigger, to imagine what is possible. And I think that's the thing that constrains us today, is that if we only think in terms of what our business is today, and we don't take a step back and to see and imagine and hope, as you say, that the future could look really different. And well, how could we get to that place? By tapping into not what AI has, but also to what we as humans have that's unique to us. How do we use our empathy, our sense of intuition and self-reflection, our amazing ability to judge and tap into wisdom that we have accumulated through generations? What could we do with that? And if you go back to the beginning of the internet, you would never think that you'd be doing half the things that we're doing today, like 80% of the things you would do today. So we can't even begin to imagine what that would look like. And I think we could all stand to take a bit of time out to, first of all, experience the awe and wonder that comes with this. I mean, it's amazing what it can do. And then to imagine what else it could do to change not just the way our organizations work. I mean, if the only value we get is to be more efficient and be more profitable, we're missing it, the point. What if we could have value being created with a capital V, value in the human condition, humans being the best people that we can be, the best humans we can be? That would be amazing. So I think we should imagine that and build for that.
It's almost the same balance, right, Charlene, between, having cautious concerns about, the outcomes that we could be affecting here, while balancing that with the optimism of the outcomes that we could be affecting here, and making sure that, we're not missing that, because, the possibilities are really tremendous, and it's helpful to be appropriately cautious, but it's hard not to be, quite excited and optimistic about the possibilities. We can find a way to make all of those work in a human first kind of way. So, Charlene, what can I tell our readers about as we wrap things up here, how they can find your book, find your and Katya's book? Is it Amazon? What's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, Amazon. It's available on Amazon and most online outlets. Again, it's called Winning with AI, the 90-day blueprint for success. It's in all sorts of formats: hardcover, paperback, audiobook, ebook. Whichever way you like to consume a book, it's there. And you can find more information at winningwithaibook.com. And you can follow me on LinkedIn and also see all my writings and my services at charleneli.com.
It's a wonderful book, as all of your books have been, Charlene. Sincerely, I love it. It's insightful, and I think it digests a tremendous amount of ideas and information, really efficiently from a leader reading perspective. It's a productive read, and you can pick through it too. You can pick through it as you need to find some of the things that you're looking for. So, all kudos to you once again for coming up with this. And was this the first time that you wrote with Katya?
Yes, but it's not the first time I worked with her. We worked together at Forrester for a long time. So I've known her since we started there in 1999. And so first and foremost, she's a dear friend. We literally have grown up together professionally and personally.
Love it.
And so it's been wonderful. It's been an absolute joy being able to work on this project with her.
Is she in academia now, Charlene, or where is she?
She is the AI lead at Apollo Management Group, and it has a long history of being a chief AI officer. So it was great. I'd write something. She goes, "That's not the way it really happens in the real world." So she was like my reality sounding board.
That's helpful. That's great. Charlene, thank you again for coming on. We enjoy having you. I hope you come back. Good luck with the book. I want to make sure folks know that it really just got out a few months ago. So I hope you're busy with a book tour and other interesting things in promoting this. So thanks again, and come see us and let us know what you find a year from now in terms of lessons learned. Would love to hear it.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Okay, see you soon.